Please, do me a small favor. Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a specific sound from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rhythmic, metallic ticking of the old clock in your grandmother's living room. Or maybe it is the unmistakable, scratchy melody of a bouzouki playing on a crackling transistor radio on a lazy Sunday afternoon. Can you smell the heavy, sweet scent of jasmine mixing with the salty sea breeze? Welcome back. Welcome home. Today, we are going to take a slow, beautiful walk down memory lane. We are traveling back to the Greece of the 1970s and 1980s, a time when our world was vastly different. We are going to look at 20 completely normal things we all did back then. Things that today would be considered absolutely illegal, highly dangerous, or simply unacceptable. We will remember the freedom, the slight chaos, and the immense joy of those days. And I promise you, by the time we reach the very last memory on this list, you might just find a warm, unexpected tear of happiness in your eye. Before we begin our list, let us remember how time used to feel. Back in those decades, time simply flowed slower. There was no rush, no constant buzzing of mobile phones, no digital screens demanding our immediate attention. Waiting was a natural part of life. We waited for the afternoon bus in the shade of a plane tree. We waited for the local postman to bring a handwritten letter. We waited for our favorite song to play on the radio. And in those quiet moments of waiting, we talked to each other. We actually looked into the eyes of our neighbors. Today, people often say that without modern technology, our lives in the past must have been poor. But you and I know the absolute truth. We were never poor in the things that truly mattered. Our lives were incredibly rich in sincerity, in human connection, and in raw, unfiltered experiences. We lived with open doors, both literally and metaphorically. The rules were fewer, and the trust was greater. Let us dive into those forgotten days and see how much the world has changed. Let us journey back to the blindingly bright summers of our youth, somewhere in the early 1980s. Do you remember the absolute thrill of riding in the open back of a small pickup truck? Today, if the police saw a family sitting in the dusty cargo bed of a truck, heavy fines would immediately follow. But back then, this was the ultimate symbol of a Greek summer weekend. The father would be driving, a lit cigarette resting on the edge of the window, while the mother sat in the passenger seat, holding a massive cooler filled with peaches, feta cheese, and cold water. We, the children, alongside perhaps a cousin or two, would be tossed into the back. We would sit on old woven blankets, the hot metal of the truck baking under the Mediterranean sun. The wind would whip through our hair, carrying the intoxicating scent of dry pine needles, wild thyme, and the approaching salty sea. We did not have seatbelts. We did not have safety standards. What we had was an overwhelming sense of freedom. Every bump in the dirt road made us bounce and laugh, our hands gripping the metal edges as we watched the silver olive groves blur past us. It was a communal experience, a tiny adventure before we even reached the beach. Today, it is entirely illegal. Yet, those dusty, bumpy rides remain some of the most precious, unclouded memories of our childhood. And now let us remember the unforgettable nights of our youth. Picture the smoky, vibrant atmosphere of a traditional bouzouki club in the 1970s. Do you remember the sound of real, heavy ceramic plates shattering on the dance floor? Today, this practice is strictly banned for safety reasons, replaced by soft, harmless carnation flowers. But back then, smashing plates was an emotional release, a passionate expression of joy, sorrow, and deep appreciation for the music. When the singer hit that high, heart-wrenching note, or when someone danced a heavy, soulful zeibekiko, the waiters would bring towering stacks of white plaster and clay plates. People would throw them at the feet of the dancer with immense force. The loud crashes, the white dust rising into the air, the crunching of broken pottery under leather shoes. It was chaotic, it was loud, and yes, people frequently got cut by flying shards, but no one cared. It was a ritual of absolute freedom. The smell of whiskey, the thick cloud of tobacco smoke, and the hypnotic rhythm of the bouzouki created a world where emotions were worn on the sleeve. You cannot do this today. The law forbids it. But those who lived it know that tossing a handful of flowers will never replace the raw, thrilling sound of 100 plates breaking in perfect harmony with a tragic love song. Let us move from the late-night clubs to the bright mornings in our old neighborhoods. How many of you remember being 7 or 8 years old and being sent to the local kiosk to buy cigarettes for your father or grandfather? Today, selling tobacco to a minor is a serious offense, and rightly so. But in 1975, it was merely an everyday chore. You would hear your father say, "Run to the Periptero and get me a pack of Assos or Karelia." He would hand you a few heavy, beautifully designed drachma coins. You would run down the sunny street, feeling the rough texture of the coins sweating in your small palm. The kiosk owner, who knew your entire family by name, would not even blink. He would reach up, grab the colourful pack of unfiltered cigarettes and hand it down to you. The best part of this illegal errand was the change. You were always allowed to keep the leftover drachmas to buy a small chocolate treat or a stick of chewing gum. You felt so proud carrying this adult item back home, feeling like a trusted, responsible member of the household. It was a completely different world, built on neighborhood trust rather than strict legal ages. Today, a child buying cigarettes is unthinkable, but back then, it was just another Tuesday morning. Speaking of tobacco, let us talk about the sheer volume of smoke that filled our daily lives. Today, smoking is banned in all indoor public spaces across Greece. But in the 1980s, smoking was not just a habit, it was an inescapable part of the atmosphere. People smoked absolutely everywhere. Imagine walking into a bank, a post office, or even a hospital waiting room. The air would be thick with a blue haze. Doctors would smoke while writing prescriptions. Bus drivers would have a cigarette dangling from their lips while navigating treacherous mountain roads. Even in the local coffee houses, the cafeneo, the air was so dense with smoke, you could barely see the men playing backgammon in the corner. You could smell the distinct, sharp aroma of Greek tobacco clinging to your clothes, your hair, and the velvet seats of the cinema. Ashtrays were a central piece of decor in every single room of the house. Heavy glass or brass objects sitting proudly on lace doilies. There were no warning labels, no designated smoking areas, no judgment. While we now understand the severe health risks and appreciate the clean air, one cannot help but feel a strange nostalgia for that era. The shared lighter, the offering of a cigarette to a stranger, these were deeply ingrained social rituals that have now vanished into thin air. And now let us remember how we travelled through the narrow streets of our towns. Think about the iconic, noisy mopeds, the beloved papaki. If you grew up in Greece in the 1980s, you or someone you knew owned one. Today, riding a motorcycle without a certified helmet is illegal and brings heavy penalties. But back then, helmets were practically a myth. It was completely normal to see an entire family balancing on a single small moped. The father driving, the mother sitting sideways on the back holding tightly, and a small child squeezed in the narrow space between the steering wheel and the driver. The wind would blow directly into our faces, drying our tears and messing up our hair. The loud, rattling noise of the engine would announce our arrival from 2 streets away. We felt invincible. We rode to the bakery, to the beach, to the evening square, wearing only shorts and summer sandals. The concept of protective gear was completely foreign. Yes, it was incredibly dangerous by today's standards, and yes, scraped knees were a daily occurrence. But that feeling of the warm evening breeze against your bare face, the smell of exhaust mixing with the scent of blooming orange trees, that is a memory of pure, unadulterated youth that modern safety laws have quietly locked away forever. Let us take a moment to reflect on how children played. Today, parents schedule playdates, track their children on mobile phones, and rarely let them out of sight. In the 1970s, childhood was a wild, untamed republic. Once the school homework was done, we would burst out the front door and into the neighborhood. We played in the middle of active streets, stopping our game of football only when a rare car approached, shouting at the driver to pass quickly. We climbed high, dangerous fruit trees in abandoned lots, coming home with purple stains from mulberries and deep scratches on our arms. We wandered miles away from our homes, exploring construction sites and hidden creeks. Our parents did not know exactly where we were, and they did not panic. The only rule, the only universal law of our childhood, was to be home when the streetlights flickered on. The entire neighborhood acted as a collective parent. If you misbehaved, the lady from the corner house would scold you, and your mother would find out before you even reached your doorstep. This absolute freedom to roam, to take risks, to get hurt and stand back up without adult supervision would probably trigger child protection services today. But it was exactly this wild freedom that built our resilience and our character. And what about the sounds that woke us up in the mornings? Today, there are strict noise ordinances and municipal laws against disturbing the peace. But in our youth, the morning was announced by the loud, distorted voices of the travelling street vendors. Long before supermarkets existed on every corner, the local grocer, the manavis, would drive his small battered truck slowly through the neighborhood. Attached to the roof of his truck was a massive, crackling megaphone. He would shout at the top of his lungs, advertising fresh watermelons, ripe tomatoes, and sweet grapes. The loud, rhythmic chanting would echo against the concrete walls of the apartment buildings, waking up everyone in a 3-block radius. Instead of being angry, housewives would step out onto their balconies, lowering woven baskets tied to thick ropes down to the street. They would shout their orders from the 3rd floor, dropping drachma coins into the basket. The vendor would weigh the vegetables on a rusty mechanical scale, place them in the basket, and the woman would pull her groceries up. It was a loud, chaotic, and completely unregulated system of commerce. Today, such a noisy practice would result in immediate police complaints. Yet, that crackling voice echoing in the summer heat is a melody we deeply miss. Let us talk about another neighborhood ritual that has completely disappeared due to modern municipal laws. Do you remember the grand washing of the carpets? As spring turned into summer, the women of the neighborhood would haul their heavy woolen winter rugs out onto the public sidewalks. Today, blocking the sidewalk and wasting hundreds of liters of municipal water is totally illegal and frowned upon. But back then, it was a magnificent communal event. Women would roll up their sleeves, connect long green rubber hoses to their yard taps, and flood the concrete pavements. They would throw buckets of soapy water onto the thick carpets and scrub them fiercely with hard wooden brooms. The soapy runoff would flow down the gutters, carrying away the dust of the winter. We, as children, would run barefoot through the cold, bubbly water, slipping and laughing. The women would gossip over the fences, discussing everything from local marriages to the rising price of olive oil, while their arms worked tirelessly. Once clean, the heavy, wet carpets were hung over the balcony railings to dry under the fierce sun, dripping water onto the street below for days. It was a beautiful, messy, and totally unregulated display of domestic pride and community bonding. And now, let us remember the simple, unregulated food and drink we consumed. Today, every bottle of alcohol must have a tax stamp, an expiration date, and a certified list of ingredients. But if you walked into a traditional local grocery store in the 1970s, the bacalhau, things were wonderfully different. Next to the counter, you would often find unlabeled, reused plastic water bottles filled with a clear, harsh liquid. This was homemade siporo, or raki, made by the shop owner's cousin in a distant village. There were no health inspections, no quality control boards, no official tax records. You bought it purely based on the trust you had in the man behind the counter. He would pour a tiny bit into a cloudy shot glass for you to taste before buying. The smell was potent, smelling of fermented grapes and strong anise. We trusted the process because we trusted the people. We bought golden thick olive oil in large, unmarked tin cans and huge blocks of feta cheese straight from wooden barrels soaking in brine. Today, selling homemade untaxed liquor in repurposed plastic bottles is a serious crime. But back then, it was the only way we knew how to live. It was authentic, it was cheap, and it brought a fierce, fiery joy to our evening tables. Let us sail away for a moment and remember how we travelled to the beautiful Greek islands. Today, passenger ferries are highly regulated, You must have a designated seat, safety protocols are strictly enforced, and passenger limits are legally binding. But in the late 70s and 80s, taking a ferry in the middle of August was an adventure in survival and absolute freedom. We bought the cheapest ticket available, the deck class. When we boarded the massive, roaring ships in Piraeus, we rushed to claim our territory. Families would spread out old newspapers, sleeping bags, and cardboard boxes directly on the dirty, vibrating steel deck of the ship. We would sleep out in the open, huddled together under the starry sky, feeling the cold sea spray misting over our faces. The loud hum of the ship's massive engines would lull us to sleep. People would share sandwiches and thermoses of coffee with total strangers sitting just inches away on the floor. There were no marked boundaries, no safety aisles left clear. We were packed like sardines, singing songs to the sound of a guitar while the ship cut through the dark Aegean waters. Doing this today would violate a dozen maritime safety laws, but those rough, beautiful journeys on the cold steel decks were the true beginning of every magical summer. Speaking of summer magic, let us recall the absolute freedom of where we could sleep once we reached those islands. Do you remember the era of completely free, wild camping? Today, setting up a tent on a public beach in Greece is strictly illegal and heavily patrolled by local authorities. But in our youth, places like Matala in Crete or the endless sandy stretches of Ios and Naxos belonged to everyone. You could arrive with a simple canvas tent, a sleeping bag, and absolutely no money. We would pitch our tents right where the waves met the sand, sleeping under the ancient, sprawling tamarisk trees. We would build small, open campfires on the beach at night to roast freshly caught fish or simple potatoes, entirely unaware of fire hazard regulations. We bathed in the sea with rough green soap, and our hair was constantly stiff from the salt. There were no fences, no entrance fees, no private beach clubs with expensive sunbeds. The land was wild, and it was ours to enjoy simply by being there. The authorities turned a blind eye, and a culture of deep communal respect for nature existed. Today, you would be arrested or heavily fined for building a fire and sleeping on the sand, but those starlit nights remain the definition of true paradise. Let us step away from the summer sun and back into the strict, quiet classrooms of our childhood. This memory might bring a mixed feeling of dread and respect. Today, corporal punishment in schools is absolutely illegal, recognized as child abuse, and would end a teacher's career immediately. But in the 1960s and 70s, the local teacher, the daskalos, held absolute, terrifying authority. Do you remember the heavy wooden ruler? If you did not know your multiplication tables, if you spoke out of turn, or if your handwriting was sloppy, you were called to the front of the class. You had to hold out your hands, palms facing up, and the teacher would strike them with the wooden ruler. The sharp, stinging pain would bring tears to your eyes, but you dared not cry out loud. And the most incredible part, if you went home and complained to your parents that the teacher had hit you, your father would likely discipline you again, firmly believing that if the teacher struck you, you absolutely deserved it. It was a harsh, unforgiving system of discipline. While we are grateful that children today learn in a kinder, safer environment, that old, terrifying wooden ruler instilled a rigid sense of respect and order that many older people feel is entirely missing from today's society. And now let us remember the unforgettable, chaotic journeys on the long-distance provincial buses. Today, if you board a modern, air-conditioned bus, you are surrounded by silence, strict luggage rules, and absolutely no animals. But a journey to the village in the 1970s was a completely different story. It was perfectly normal for passengers to bring live animals on board. Picture a crowded, hot bus winding up a steep mountain road. The air smells of diesel fuel and sweat, and sitting in the aisle, right next to your feet, is a burlap sack tied at the top, constantly moving and clucking because it is filled with live chickens. Sometimes, a farmer would bring a small, bleating lamb on board, holding it in his lap for the 2-hour journey back to his village. The bus driver would shout, the chickens would panic at every sharp turn, and the passengers would argue and laugh loudly across the seats. Nobody complained to any health authority. Nobody cited hygiene regulations. The bus was the lifeline of the countryside, and it carried whatever the people needed to survive. Today, Bringing a live farm animal onto public transport would cause an absolute panic and immediate legal action. But back then, it was just another part of the beautiful tapestry of rural life. Let us talk about a chore that filled the autumn air with a very specific, unforgettable scent. Do you remember burning the dry leaves and agricultural waste? Today, lighting an open fire in your backyard or your field to burn rubbish is strictly illegal, carrying massive fines due to the very real danger of wildfires. But decades ago, it was the standard way of cleaning up. As autumn approached, our fathers and grandfathers would rake massive piles of dry leaves, pruned olive branches, and even household paper waste. They would simply strike a match and let it burn right there in the open field or the corner of the yard. The thick, white smoke would rise slowly into the cool evening air, covering the entire village in a distinct, smoky aroma. We, as children, would stand dangerously close to the flames, throwing dry twigs in to see the sparks fly up like tiny fireflies. We would even toss raw potatoes into the hot ashes, waiting patiently for them to blacken and bake. There was no fire department standing by, no environmental protection agencies monitoring the air quality. It was a primal, simple way of managing the land. That scent of burning olive wood in the crisp autumn air is something deeply etched into our souls, a sensory memory of a world less regulated. And while we are thinking of the land, let us remember how we used to gather our food straight from the earth. Today, foraging on private land or protected municipal areas is considered trespassing and theft. But back in the 1970s, the entire countryside was an open pantry. On lazy Sunday mornings, mothers and grandmothers would take a small, sharp knife and a plastic bag and walk out into the open fields and hillsides. They were looking for wild greens, the beloved horta. They knew exactly which plants were edible and which were bitter. We would cross fences, walk through olive groves that belonged to people we did not even know, and gather wild oregano, chamomile, and fresh greens. No one ever shouted at you for being on their land. There was an unspoken, ancient understanding that the wild fruits of the earth belonged to anyone willing to bend their back and harvest them. We would bring the greens home, boil them, and drown them in fresh lemon and thick olive oil. It was free, it was incredibly healthy, and it was a deep connection to the soil of our ancestors. Today, property lines are fiercely guarded, and trespassing laws are strictly enforced, ending this ancient, quiet ritual of living off the shared land. Let us recall an incredible phenomenon that shaped the very look of our modern cities and suburbs. Do you remember how houses were built overnight? Today, adding a single room to your house requires a mountain of expensive architectural permits, engineering approvals, and constant municipal inspections. But in the rapid expansion of Greece in the 1960s and 70s, there was a completely different method. It was the era of the arbitrary constructions, the famous afthareta. Because the law stated that if a structure had a roof, it could not be easily demolished by the police, families would literally build entire rooms under the cover of darkness. Relatives, friends, and neighbors would gather secretly on a Friday night, working quietly and furiously under the moonlight, mixing concrete by hand, laying bricks, and pouring the cement roof before the sun came up on Monday morning. When the police finally arrived, the roof was already on, and the family was living inside. It was technically completely illegal, but it was a desperate, heroic effort by poor, hard-working families to put a solid roof over their children's heads. The state eventually pardoned most of these buildings, but that raw, rebellious, communal spirit of building a house by moonlight is something entirely impossible in today's strictly regulated world. Now, let us turn our memories to the most sacred and explosive time of the year, Easter in Greece. Today, the use of homemade explosives and large firecrackers is heavily prosecuted, and police patrol the churches to confiscate illegal fireworks. But if you grew up a few decades ago, you know that Easter Saturday was a literal war zone. Young men in the villages and neighborhoods would spend weeks secretly preparing homemade explosives, the terrifying berolota. They would pack gunpowder tightly into heavy cardboard or even metal pipes. When the priest finally chanted that Christ has risen, the midnight sky would absolutely erupt. The noise was deafening, echoing off the stone walls of the village square. Windows would rattle, stray dogs would howl in terror, and thick, sulphurous smoke would choke the air. It was incredibly dangerous. Every year, people lost fingers or suffered burns, yet the tradition continued with fierce, stubborn pride. It was a raw, loud display of joy and rebellion. Today, we stand in the churchyard with quiet, government-approved sparklers, appreciating the safety. But deep down, the older generation remembers the absolute thrill, the danger, and the earth-shaking booms that once defined a true, authentic Greek Easter. Let us move from the loud holidays back to the quiet, everyday mornings. Let us talk about what we drank for breakfast. Today, dairy products are heavily pasteurized, sealed in sterile plastic, and tightly controlled by health organizations. But in our childhood, milk arrived in its purest, most unregulated form. The local shepherd or milkman would walk through the neighborhood very early in the morning, leading his donkey or driving a small cart. He carried massive, heavy aluminium cans filled with warm, fresh, unpasteurized milk straight from the sheep or goats. Our mothers would wait at the front gate with an empty glass jug. The milkman would use a tin measuring cup to pour the frothy, rich liquid directly into our containers. The smell was earthy and incredibly strong. Before we could drink it, our mothers had to boil it fiercely on the stove to kill the bacteria. A thick yellow skin would form on top, which some of us hated and some of us loved. There were no expiration dates, no fat percentages printed on a label, no health inspections, just a direct, trusting transaction between the farmer and the family. Selling unpasteurized milk door to door today would be a severe health code violation, but we grew up strong and healthy on that rich, authentic village milk. And how did we explore the world beyond our villages? Let us remember the lost art of hitchhiking. Today, the idea of standing on the side of a busy highway, sticking your thumb out, and getting into a car with a complete stranger sounds absolutely terrifying and incredibly dangerous. Police advise against it, and parents warn their children never to do it. But in the 1970s, hitchhiking was the primary mode of transport for young people, soldiers, and students with no money. You could stand on the hot asphalt of the national road, wearing your jeans and carrying a heavy canvas backpack, and within 20 minutes, a friendly truck driver or a family in a small Fiat would pull over. They would clear a space in the back seat, offer you a cigarette or a piece of fruit, and drive you miles across the country. You would share stories, listen to old cassette tapes, and part ways as friends. There was an immense, beautiful trust in the goodness of strangers. We did not fear each other. The roads were slower, and the hearts of the people were more open. Hitchhiking today is essentially dead, killed by modern paranoia and very real safety concerns. But we belong to a generation that traveled the entire length of Greece, fueled only by trust and the kindness of passing drivers. Finally, let us remember the ultimate test of bravery from our childhood summers. Think of the deep, dark blue waters of the local harbour. Today, swimming near ports, jumping off high concrete piers, or diving from jagged rocks is strictly forbidden. There are warning signs, fences, and Coast Guard patrols ensuring no one risks their life. But back then, the harbour was our ultimate playground. We would climb up the highest, most dangerous rocks, the ones covered in sharp barnacles and slippery green moss. We would stand at the edge, our hearts pounding in our small chests, looking down at the deep water. The older boys would jump first, performing reckless flips, and then it was our turn. We would leap into the air, screaming, before hitting the cold, salty water with a massive splash. There were no lifeguards on duty. There were no warning signs. If you cut your foot on a sea urchin, you simply limped home, pulled the black spikes out with a needle, and went back the next day. We learned to swim by simply being thrown into the deep end. It was dangerous, unregulated, and entirely our own world. We survived not because of safety laws, but because we learned to respect the sea through pure, raw experience. And that careless, brave leap into the deep blue is a feeling we will cherish for the rest of our lives. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, it becomes clear that we do not just miss the old objects or the dangerous habits. What we truly miss is the way life felt. We miss the boundless freedom, the deep trust in our neighbors, and the beautiful, unhurried rhythm of a world that no longer exists. We survived the lack of safety rules, the wild childhoods, and the tough discipline, and it made us who we are today. A generation with strong roots, rich memories, and a profound appreciation for genuine human connection. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel. We have so many more beautiful memories to share together. Now, I turn to you, my dear friend. Which of these 20 memories touched your heart the most? What is a completely normal thing you did in your youth that would shock the young people of today? Please write your story in the comments below. I will be waiting there to read it. Until we meet again, stay healthy and never let those beautiful memories fade.